Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The rain fell in a gentle, rhythmic pattern, tapping softly against the leaves of the ancient trees that stood like silent sentinels over the vast, mysterious land. The air carried the scent of damp earth and distant firewood, mingling with the whispers of a world filled with magic, monsters, and fate-bound wanderers. In this land, known simply as the continent, kingdoms rose and crumbled. Empires waged war over ambition and pride, and deep in the shadows, creatures of the night lurked, waiting for their moment to strike. But among them walked a select few mutants, outcasts, hunters of the uncanny, called witchers. Trained from childhood, their bodies and minds were reforged through fire, alchemy, and pain, making them something beyond human. They were faster, stronger, their reflexes honed to an unnatural degree. Their golden, feline eyes could pierce through the darkest night, spotting dangers unseen by ordinary men. Armed with steel for men and silver for beasts, they traveled from village to village, their presence both feared and desperately needed. A witcher's path was a lonely one, filled with thankless tasks and the ever-present weight of suspicion. Among them was Gerald of Rivia, one of the last remaining of his kind. The world had little love for witchers, and yet, when the shadows crept too close, when howls echoed from the forests at dusk, or when a curse settled upon a noble's hall, it was men like Gerald they called upon. He had walked these roads longer than most, taking coin for his services, slaying monsters, and trying, however futile it seemed, to navigate the tangled web of human affairs. For all his efforts, fate had its own plans, and for all his claims of neutrality, destiny would not let him remain indifferent forever. The story of the continent was not only one of men and monsters, but of forces far older, powers that stretched beyond time itself. Thousands of years before Gerald's blade ever clashed with a beast's fangs, the world had been reshaped by an event known as the conjunction of the spheres. A cosmic cataclysm had merged dimensions, spilling forth creatures not meant for this realm: ghouls, vampires, wraiths, and horrors unnamed. With them came something else: magic, chaos itself, woven into the very fabric of existence, waiting to be harnessed by those who dared. It was through this convergence that humanity learned to wield magic, and from the dust of destruction, the first sorcerers arose. But mankind was not the first to walk this land. Before them, before their kingdoms, before their wars, there had been the elder races. Gnomes, dwarves, elves, ancient beings, whose histories stretched back into the mists of time. The elves, graceful and wise, had once ruled over grand cities, their white ships bringing them from distant lands long before humans ever set foot upon these shores. Yet, when mankind arrived, they did not come as guests. They came as conquerors, warriors. With fire and steel, they drove the elves from their lands, pushing them into the wilds, into the shadows of history. Even among the humans, power was never equal. Some sought to harness the raw force of magic, bending it to their will. These mages, learned in the ways of the arcane, formed their own hierarchies, their own factions, their own political games. Once, there had been unity among them, a brotherhood of sorcerers that sought to guide the use of magic, to protect knowledge from corruption. But ambition and betrayal ran deep. In time, the brotherhood crumbled, and from its ashes rose the Lodge of Sorceresses, a secretive order of powerful women who believed that men could no longer be trusted with the fate of magic. Magic was not the only force that men sought to control. The monsters that had come through the conjunction threatened the survival of humankind, preying upon their settlements, turning their nights into nightmares. Desperate, the greatest mages of their age turned to unnatural means. Within the walls of a hidden fortress, they conducted experiments that many would call monstrous in themselves. They took young boys, subjected them to alchemical trials, broke their bodies, and remade them into something else. Most did not survive, but those who did became the first witchers. These early witchers, however, were deemed failures by their creators. Though they gained great speed, strength, and resilience, they could wield only the simplest of magic, mere tricks compared to the grand spells of the mages. Dismissed as charlatans practicing mere witchery, they were cast out. But what the world saw as failure, others saw as potential. The witchers found a new home, new purpose. They divided into different schools, each refining their own techniques, their own methods of training, their own ways of survival. The school of the wolf, the school of the cat, the school of the griffin, and others, all shaping their young recruits into warriors capable of standing against the horrors that haunted the dark corners of the world. Geralt belonged to the school of the wolf. His training had been harsh, unrelenting, pushing him past the limits of human endurance. He had survived the trial of grasses, the brutal mutation process that granted witchers their abilities, but killed most who underwent it. He had been taught to wield his twin swords, to read the movements of creatures that would strike faster than the blink of an eye, to brew potions that would sharpen his senses or grant him the strength to fight when others would fall. But for all his training, for all his strength, he knew that monsters came in many forms. Some had claws and fangs, lurking in the forests and the ruins of the old world. Others wore crowns and sat upon thrones, their greed and ambition staining the land with as much blood as any beast. And there were those caught between the elves who had once ruled, now reduced to outcasts and rebels. The Scoia'tael, fighting against a world that had long since turned against them. Through it all, Geralt walked his path, taking contracts, following the road wherever it led. He did not seek to play the games of kings, nor to meddle in the affairs of men. He was a hunter, a sword for hire, nothing more. Or so he told himself. But fate had other designs. There were forces at work beyond his understanding, ancient prophecies stirring, old powers awakening. And at the center of it all was a child. a girl born of royal blood, tied to him by destiny itself, a girl who would change the course of the world, but that, as all things, would come in time. For now, the road stretched before him, and in the distance, a new contract awaited a monster to slay, a mystery to unravel, another step on the path that he had chosen, or perhaps the path that had chosen him. The road was long, stretching ahead through misty fields and gnarled trees that reached toward the sky like the grasping fingers of forgotten ghosts. The land was quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Geralt rode in silence, his steed, Roach, moving at a steady pace beneath him. He had spent years wandering these lands, following the trail of coin and contracts. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a feeling, a weight that pressed against the edges of his thoughts, like an omen yet to unfold. He was heading toward a village on the outskirts of Temeria, a place barely marked on any map. The notice had been simple. Beast haunts our fields. Cursed, they say. Men have gone missing. Reward offered to he who can rid us of this terror. It was the kind of work witchers were made for, the kind of trouble that most men would rather ignore until it was too late. The village came into view just as the last remnants of daylight faded into the horizon, leaving only the glow of lanterns and the dim flicker of a fire behind shuttered windows. A few villagers lingered near their doors, watching him with wary eyes, whispering among themselves. It was always the same. They feared him, not for what he had done, but for what he was. A freak, a mutant, an unnatural thing that did not belong in their world. Yet, when their children screamed in the night, or their crops withered under unseen curses, they called for men like him. He dismounted near the village square, where an old man stood waiting, his shoulders hunched beneath a tattered cloak. His face was lined with the passage of time, his hands shaking slightly as he gestured for Geralt to follow. "You came," the elder said, his voice a hushed rasp. "We prayed someone would." Geralt nodded, but said nothing. He had long since learned that words were often meaningless in places like these. Instead, he followed the man toward the village's meager gathering hall, a structure barely standing against the weight of age and neglect. Inside, a few others were gathered, a handful of farmers, a blacksmith, a woman clutching a sleeping child. Their eyes flickered to him, filled with equal parts hope and unease. "It comes at night," the old man began, his fingers twisting the fabric of his cloak. "A shadow, a beast, takes the men, never leaves a trace. We find their things sometimes a boot, a belt, once even a hand, but no bodies. Just gone." Geralt listened, his mind already sifting through possibilities. "Tracks?" he asked. The blacksmith, a burly man with soot-stained hands, shook his head. "Nothing we can follow. Whatever it is, it doesn't walk like a man. No footprints in the dirt, no sign of struggle. Just gone. A curse, then, or something worse." Geralt leaned back against the wooden wall, arms crossed. Where was the last attack? The woman holding the child shuddered. "The mill," she whispered. "My husband. He was taken 3 nights ago." Geralt nodded. "I'll start there." They stared at him, waiting for something, reassurance, perhaps. But he had none to give. Witchers did not make promises, only deals. And so, without another word, he turned and walked out into the night. The cold air pressing against his skin like the breath of some unseen force. The path to the mill was lined with overgrown weeds and crumbling stones, the scent of damp wood filling the air. The building itself loomed in the darkness, its broken windows staring like hollowed-out eyes. Geralt moved carefully, his boots making no sound against the earth. His hand rested on the hilt of his silver sword, his senses attuned to the silence around him. Then he heard it, a whisper faint, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind. It was not the voice of a man, nor the growl of a beast. It was something else, something wrong. He stepped forward, his eyes adjusting to the dimness within the mill. The wooden beams creaked above him, shifting as if under some unseen weight. His fingers traced the hilt of his blade, ready to draw, ready to strike. A shadow moved. He turned sharply, his cat-like eyes locking onto the shifting form at the far end of the room. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs elongated, twisted. Its fingers stretched into claw-like extensions, its face obscured by the darkness. But its eyes burned like embers in the night, filled with something ancient, something hungry. Geralt did not hesitate. He moved with practiced precision, drawing his blade in a single, fluid motion. The creature let out a sound, something between a hiss and a sigh, as if exhaling centuries of sorrow. Then it lunged. He met its attack with steel, his blade cutting through the air with deadly grace. The creature moved unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways that defied logic. It struck with speed, its claws scraping against his armor, sending sparks into the darkness. Geralt countered, pivoting on his heel, his silver sword slicing through the creature's side. It let out a shriek, retreating momentarily, its form flickering like a dying flame. A wraith, not just any wraith, but something old, something bound to this place by an unresolved curse. He had seen such things before, souls trapped between worlds, tethered by grief, rage, or regret. Killing it outright would do nothing. He had to break the tether. His free hand reached for the small pouch at his belt, fingers closing around a vial of spectre oil. He coated his blade in the shimmering substance, the silver now gleaming with an unnatural light. The creature hesitated, sensing the shift in the air. "Time to end this," Geralt muttered. The wraith shrieked, lunging again. But this time, Geralt was ready. He moved with calculated precision, striking where the creature's essence flickered weakest. His sword passed through its spectral form, severing the strands of magic that bound it. The wraith let out a final, shuddering cry before collapsing into nothingness, its form dissipating like smoke caught in the wind. The mill was silent once more. Gerald exhaled, sheathing his blade as he scanned the room. There, half buried in the dust, lay the remains of an old necklace, its chain rusted, its gemstone cracked. He picked it up, studying it carefully. A name was engraved on the back, barely legible beneath the years of decay. A story lay here, one lost to time. A woman who had died waiting for someone who never returned. A love that had soured into something twisted and vengeful. The villagers would never know the full truth, nor would they care. They wanted safety, not stories. As he stepped out into the night, the stars now visible between shifting clouds, he could already picture their reactions. The old man would thank him. The blacksmith would hand him his coin, and the rest would continue watching him with the same wary eyes as before. Witchers did not earn trust, only gold. And so he mounted Roach once more, turning toward the road that stretched endlessly ahead. Another contract complete, another tale left behind in the dust. The path continued, and he followed. The village had returned to its uneasy quiet, the kind of silence that always followed the departure of a witcher. Gerald had collected his payment at dawn, the old man's hands trembling as he pressed the coin into his palm. There was no celebration, no applause, only a handful of muttered thanks and averted gazes. He was neither hero nor villain in their eyes, just a necessary evil, a specter passing through. With the morning sun creeping over the horizon, he rode away, the clinking of coins in his pouch drowned beneath the rhythmic thud of Roach's hooves. The road stretched onward, winding through the rolling hills of Temeria, lined with ancient oaks and fields of golden wheat. Yet, no matter how far he rode, the weight of unspoken stories clung to him. Every village, every ruin, every contract held ghosts of their own, whispers of things long buried, waiting to be unearthed. But it was not the past that lingered most in his mind. It was the future. More specifically, hers. Ciri, Cyrilla Fiona Elen Ryanen, child of prophecy, heir to a legacy far greater than any throne, bound to him by fate itself. He had tried to outrun destiny once, to dismiss the pull of the law of surprise as mere superstition. But the world did not bend to the desires of men, not even witchers. Time and again, his path had crossed with hers, and in the end, he had done what he never thought possible. He had taken her in, raised her, trained her as one of his own. She had been just a girl when she arrived at Kaer Morhen, all wild spirit and untamed defiance. The old keep had never housed one like her before. It had been built for witchers, for men honed into weapons, for boys who had barely survived the trials. But Ciri, she was something else entirely. Vesemir had been the first to see it, that fire in her, that unrelenting will. The others had been skeptical at first. Lambert had scoffed. Eskel had merely raised an eyebrow. But in time, they too had come to accept her. She trained with them, bled with them, ran the gauntlet with a determination that defied reason. She was not a witcher, not truly, but she was as close as one could be without undergoing the mutations. Yet, even with all her training, all her strength, there was something deeper within her, something ancient and untamed. The elder blood coursed through her veins, a power long thought lost to time, tied to a prophecy that whispered of the end and rebirth of the world. And there were those who would stop at nothing to claim her. The wild hunt, a name spoken in hushed tones, a tale told to frighten children. But Geralt knew better. They were real. Wraith-like riders from another realm, their skeletal steeds galloping through the void, their eyes burning with unnatural light. They pursued her, hunted her, for reasons still shrouded in mystery. But he would not let them have her, not while he still drew breath. The wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of rain. Geralt's grip on the reins tightened slightly. He was nearing Oxenfurt, the great university city known for its scholars, its alchemists, and its endless tangle of politics. He had no love for politics, but he needed information. Rumors of Nilfgaard's movements had reached even the smallest villages, whispers of war brewing once more, of the Empire stretching its claws toward the north. If Nilfgaard moved, so did its emperor. And that meant Emhyr var Emreis, the white flame dancing on the graves of his foes, and Ciri's father. Geralt did not believe in coincidences. If Nilfgaard was stirring, if the hunt was growing restless, then the game had already begun. And somewhere in its tangled web, Ciri was caught. He urged Roach onward. By midday, the city's spires were visible against the gray sky, rising above the river Pontar like jagged blades. Oxenfurt was a place of knowledge, a city that prided itself on its pursuit of truth. But truth was a fickle thing, especially in a world where power dictated reality. As he approached the gates, the usual scrutiny followed. The guards eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and barely concealed disdain. Witchers were rare in places like this, too dangerous, too unpredictable. He paid them no mind. Coins exchanged hands, and the gates creaked open, allowing him passage into the crowded streets beyond. Oxenfurt was alive with movement. Merchants called out from their stalls. Students hurried between lecture halls, and the ever-present hum of conversation filled the air. But Geralt had no time for idle observation. He had come for one reason alone. Yennefer. He found her where he always did, in the quiet corners where power was whispered, not flaunted. The inn was small, unremarkable, but its patrons were anything but. Scholars, spies, and sorcerers alike gathered in such places, sharing knowledge over goblets of wine, exchanging secrets for the right price. She sat near the fire, her raven-black hair cascading over her shoulders, violet eyes glinting with the sharpness of a blade. She did not turn as he approached, but he knew she had sensed him the moment he entered the room. "You're late," she murmured, her voice smooth as silk, laced with something unreadable. "I wasn't aware we set a time," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. Her lips curved slightly, a ghost of a smirk. "You never are." For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence filled with years of history, of unspoken words and paths that had led them back to each other time and again. Love was a dangerous thing in their world, fleeting as the seasons, but theirs had always been something more. A fire that refused to die, no matter how many times the winds of fate tried to extinguish it. Finally, she leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. "I assume you're here because of Ciri." He nodded. "Something coming, Yen. The hunt, Nilfgaard, they're moving. And if they're moving, it means she's in danger." Yennefer exhaled, her fingers tracing the rim of her goblet. "I've been hearing whispers. The lodge is concerned. There's talk of something old, something stirring beneath it all. I don't have the full picture yet, but I'm looking." He studied her, searching for the unspoken meaning in her words. "And the lodge, where do they stand?" A shadow passed over her expression. "Where they always stand, where power leads them. Some want to use her. Others want to protect her. None understand what she truly is." Geralt ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Then we find her first." She nodded. "Yes, before anyone else does." The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the city bustled on, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. And in the distance, beneath the darkening sky, the wild hunt rode once more. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Oxenford, rattling the shutters of the old inn, as if urging those within to move, to act before it was too late. Geralt sat in the dim glow of the fire, his gaze fixed on Yennefer. The words they had exchanged still lingered in the space between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Ciri was in danger of that, there was no doubt. But the true question remained, where was she? Yennefer tapped her fingers against the wooden table, deep in thought. "I have a lead," she finally said. A trace of her magic was detected near Skellige. "It's faint, but it's there." Geralt frowned. Skellige. If she's there, it means she's either running or looking for someone she trusts. Yennefer nodded. Possibly both. She spent time there before. She may have returned to seek shelter with Cratch and Crate. Cratch and Crate, the Jarl of Skellige, an old friend, and one of the few rulers Geralt trusted. If Ciri had gone to him, she was as safe as one could be in a land ruled by war-hardened clans and the wrath of the sea. But even Skellige would not remain untouched by the forces that pursued her. "I'll leave in the morning," Geralt said. "I can be there in a few days." Yennefer studied him, her violet eyes sharp, searching. "And if she isn't there?" He exhaled. "Then we keep looking. We follow every lead until we find her." A shadow of worry flickered across her face, but she nodded. "I'll do what I can from here. There are others searching as well, and not all of them have her best interests in mind." "The lodge?" Geralt asked. Yennefer's expression hardened. "Some of them, but not just them. Nilfgaard's spies, Redanian agents, the wild hunt. They all know she's out there. They all want her for different reasons. Geralt leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Then we find her first. A silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. Yennefer reached for her goblet, took a slow sip of wine, and then met his gaze again. You should rest before you leave. The road to Skellige is long, and you'll need your strength. He nodded, but knew sleep would not come easily. His thoughts were already ahead of him, chasing the specter of a girl who had become more than just his responsibility. She was his family. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving Oxenfurt cloaked in a damp mist. Geralt stood near the docks, securing his belongings while Roach paced nearby, uneasy with the scent of salt and sea. The ship to Skellige was already being prepared, crates of cargo loaded by sailors who spoke in low, gruff voices. He had always preferred the solid ground beneath his feet, but the waters of Skellige were unavoidable. As he boarded, a familiar voice called out behind him, leaving without saying goodbye. He turned to see Yennefer standing at the edge of the dock, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Geralt smirked. Didn't think you were the sentimental type. She arched a brow. I'm not, but this is Ciri we're talking about. His expression softened. I'll find her. Yennefer stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Be careful, Geralt. Skellige may be friendly, but you know how quickly alliances can change. He squeezed her hand briefly, then let go. I know. The ship's horn sounded, signaling departure. He turned, making his way aboard as the gangplank was pulled up. As the vessel drifted from the docks, he watched Yennefer for as long as he could, until the mist swallowed the shore behind them. The journey across the sea was as rough as he remembered. The waves battered the ship, the wind howling like some vengeful spirit. The crew spoke of old legends, of drowned gods and monsters lurking beneath the surface, of ships lost to the abyss, never seen again. Geralt listened in silence, knowing that, in this world, even the wildest stories often held a sliver of truth. It was near dusk when Skellige finally came into view, a jagged land of towering cliffs, storm-beat shores, and endless rolling hills. The scent of pine and seawater filled the air, carried by the biting cold of the northern wind. As the ship docked in Caer Trold, the largest stronghold in the archipelago, Geralt stepped onto the wooden planks, his boots slick with ocean spray. The port was alive with activity, warriors sharpening their blades, merchants unloading their wares, the ever-present sound of laughter, and drinking from the nearby mead halls. A messenger spotted him almost immediately. The young man, barely past his teenage years, approached hesitantly. Witcher, he said, voice tinged with respect. Jarl Cratch and Crate is expecting you. Geralt nodded. Take me to him. The great hall of Caer Trold was as grand as ever, its wooden beams carved with the stories of Skellige's past. Fires roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the stone floor. Warriors gathered at long tables, drinking and boasting of their latest victories. Cratch and Crate sat at the head of the hall, his massive frame resting against his throne-like chair, a tankard in one hand. His face, weathered by years of battle, broke into a grin as he saw Geralt approach. "White Wolf," he bellowed, rising to his feet. "It's been too long." Geralt offered a nod. "Too long, Cratch. I hear you have news." The Jarl's expression sobered. I do. Come sit." They moved to a quieter corner of the hall, away from the clamor of the feast. Cratch leaned forward, his voice low. "Ciri was here, months ago. She came seeking shelter, just as you thought." Geralt's jaw tightened. "Where is she now?" Cratch exhaled, rubbing a hand over his beard. "Gone. Left suddenly, without a word. But she wasn't alone. Someone was with her." "Who?" "A woman, hooded, cloaked in magic. No one saw her face, but they say she spoke in whispers, like the wind through the trees." Geralt's mind raced. A sorceress, a being from another realm. He had too few answers, and even more questions. "Did she say anything before she left?" he asked. Cratch hesitated. One thing. She spoke of an island, a place of old magic. She called it Hindarsfjall." Geralt's breath stilled. Hindarsfjall, a sacred island, home to the priestesses of Freya, keepers of the old ways. If Ciri had gone there, it was not without reason. "I need to leave at once," he said. Cratch nodded. "Take what supplies you need. And Geralt, be careful. The wild hunt has been seen in these waters." Geralt met his gaze, the weight of the words settling in his chest. "They're always close," he muttered, as he stepped back into the night, the cold wind biting against his skin. He knew one thing with certainty. He was getting closer. The sea was restless, its surface rippling beneath the pale light of the moon. The longboat cut through the waves, its wooden hull creaking with each rise and fall. Geralt sat near the prow, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Hindarsfjall. The island loomed ahead, its cliffs jagged against the night sky, a land of sacred groves and ancient stones where the priestesses of Freya held sway. The journey from Caer Trold had been swift, yet uneasy. The air was thick with something unseen, an unnatural stillness that settled deep in his bones. The wild hunt had been sighted in these waters, and though no spectral riders had yet appeared, the weight of their presence lingered like a storm on the horizon. The oarsmen spoke little, their expressions tense. They were Skelligers, warriors born of salt and steel, yet even they whispered of ill omens, of shadows moving across the waves. Geralt had learned long ago to heed such warnings. Fear, when tempered by experience, often carried a grain of truth. As the boat neared the shore, he rose, steadying himself against the shifting tide. The beach was narrow, lined with smooth stones that gleamed beneath the moon's silver touch. Beyond it, the land stretched into rolling hills, thick with pine and mist, Somewhere beyond those trees lay the temple, and if the rumors were true, Ciri had come this way. The boat scraped against the shore. Geralt stepped onto the damp stones, his boots sinking slightly into the sand. He turned to the captain, a grizzled Skelliger with a beard braided in the style of warriors. "Wait for me until dawn," Geralt said. The man hesitated, then nodded. "If you're not back by then, I'll assume you're dead." Geralt smirked. Fair assumption. Without another word, he moved inland, his steps quiet against the soft earth. The scent of pine filled the air, mingling with the distant aroma of burning incense. Freya's shrine was close. He followed the winding path through the trees, the moonlight casting long shadows along his path. As he walked, a sound reached his ears, a rustling, faint but deliberate. Instinct sharpened, he halted, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of something unnatural. He turned sharply, just as a figure stepped into view. She was cloaked in darkness, her hood drawn low over her face, but magic clung to her like mist upon the mountains. He could feel it in the air, the subtle hum of power beneath the skin of reality. "You have sharp ears, Witcher," she said, her voice soft, almost melodic. "Comes with the job," he replied. His grip on his sword remained firm, but he did not draw. "Not yet. Who are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "A friend to some, an enemy to others. That doesn't answer my question." She exhaled, stepping closer. The moonlight caught her face, revealing sharp features, eyes that gleamed like polished onyx. "I know why you're here," she said. "You seek the girl." His pulse quickened, though his face remained impassive. "You've seen her." A flicker of something passed through her gaze, an emotion too swift to name. She was here, but she is gone now. Geralt's jaw tightened. "Where?" The woman hesitated. "You are not the only one searching for her, Witcher. There are others, and not all mean her well." He took a slow step forward. "I know that. Tell me where she went." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing a decision, then sighed. "To Lofoten, a village on the far side of the island. She sought refuge there." Geralt narrowed his eyes. "And you? What's your interest in her?" The woman gave a ghost of a smile. "Interest? Perhaps none at all. Or perhaps I simply wish to see where fate will lead her." He did not trust her, not fully, but he had learned that trust was a luxury few could afford. Still, she had given him a name, a direction. That was enough for now. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the mist, her form dissolving into the night, as if she had never been there at all. Geralt exhaled, rolling his shoulders before continuing forward. Lofoten, a small village, but in a land like this, even the smallest places held secrets of their own. The journey was long, the forest stretching before him in a tangle of ancient roots and whispering leaves. The hours passed in silence, save for the distant call of an owl and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. By the time he reached Lofoten, the village was still, its thatched rooftops glistening with frost beneath the first light of dawn. Smoke curled from chimneys, the scent of burning wood mixing with the brine of the sea. Geralt moved carefully, his eyes scanning the narrow streets. There was no immediate sign of Ciri, but there was something else, an unease in the air, a tension that clung to the village like a shroud. He approached a woman drawing water from a well, her hands raw from the cold. She looked up as he neared, her gaze wary. "A witcher," she murmured, her voice laced with uncertainty. Geralt nodded. "I'm looking for a girl. Young, ashen hair, green eyes. She would have come here recently." The woman's expression darkened. She cast a glance toward the others, as if seeking silent counsel, then lowered her voice. "She was here, but she's gone now." His heart clenched. Gone where? A pause. Then, in a whisper, the wild hunt came. The world seemed to slow. He had known they were close, had felt their presence like a storm on the horizon. But hearing it confirmed sent a chill through his blood. When, he asked. 3 nights passed, the woman said. They came with the mist. We hid, but we heard them voices like the howling wind, their steeds clad in frost. When the dawn came, she was gone. Geralt's fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. They had taken her. The wild hunt was no ordinary enemy. They were specters of another realm, riders of the eternal frost, beings that moved beyond the laws of man. If they had taken Ciri, it meant she was more important than even he had realized. A fire burned in his chest. He had lost her once before. He would not lose her again. Turning to the woman, he asked, "Did she say anything before they came? Did she leave anything behind?" She hesitated, then nodded. A name. Just before the hunt arrived, she spoke it. Like a prayer, like a warning. Geralt met her gaze, his voice steady. "What name?" The woman swallowed hard, then whispered, "Avalanche." Geralt felt his breath hitch. Avalanche, an elven sage, a being as old as the world itself, and a name tied to the fate of the elder blood. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was still unclear. He had to move fast. If the wild hunt had taken Ciri, then there was no time to waste. The chase had begun. The fire in the village's longhouse flickered low, casting restless shadows against the rough wooden walls. Geralt sat in silence, turning the name over in his mind. Avalanche. Few in this world knew the truth behind that name, but he did. Avalanche was not just an elf, not just a sage. He was one of the Een-El, the elves of another world, a realm beyond the reach of ordinary men. If Ciri had spoken his name before the wild hunt arrived, it meant she had known what was coming. It meant she had tried to run. The woman at the well watched him carefully, her fingers gripping the edge of her shawl. "You know this name," she said, more a statement than a question. Geralt nodded. "I do, And it tells me that Ciri's situation is even worse than I thought. The wild hunt was relentless. They did not simply take captives. They pursued those of elder blood, those who carried the rarest of gifts. And Ciri, his Ciri, was the last of her kind. She was not just their prey. She was their prize. He stood, adjusting the straps of his armor. I need to see what they left behind. The woman hesitated, then gestured toward the far side of the village. Come, she said. I'll take you to where she was last seen. The walk through Lofoten was eerily quiet. Few villagers dared to step outside, their fear lingering like a thick fog. These people were no strangers to hardship. Skellige was a land of warriors, of storms and steel. But even they had no defense against the hunt. They stopped at the edge of the village, where a small hut stood alone, its roof partially collapsed, its door hanging loosely from its hinges. The ground was frozen, the grass brittle beneath their feet. Even without stepping inside, Geralt could feel the unnatural chill in the air. She stayed here, the woman murmured. Said she was waiting for someone, but the hunt came first. Geralt stepped forward, pushing open the broken door. The inside of the hut was sparse, only a wooden table, a straw-stuffed mattress, a few scattered belongings. He moved slowly, his witcher senses sharpening, searching for anything out of place. Then he saw it, a scorch mark on the floor, not from fire, but from something else, something magical. He crouched, running his fingers over the surface. The residue tingled against his skin, humming with remnants of power. A portal. She tried to escape, he muttered under his breath. The woman behind him shifted uneasily. Did she succeed? Geralt wasn't sure. The portal's signature was faint, suggesting it had closed hastily, perhaps incomplete. If she had made it through, where had it taken her? And if she had, he pushed the thought aside. No use assuming the worst. Rising to his feet, he turned back to the woman. Did she say anything else? Anything at all before she vanished? The woman bit her lip, thinking. Then, finally, she said, just before the mist came, she left something behind. Said it was for someone who would come looking. Geralt's pulse quickened. Where is it? She motioned toward a small wooden chest tucked beneath the hut's table. He knelt and pulled it free, the hinges creaking as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a small pendant. His breath caught. It was shaped like a swallow. Cyril. His fingers closed around the pendant, the weight of it heavy in his palm. This was hers. This was proof she had been here, proof she had tried to reach him. She said the white wolf would understand, the woman murmured. Geralt clenched his jaw. Ciri had left this for him. She had known he would come, but she had also known she might not be able to wait. The wild hunt had been here. That much was certain. But they had not stayed long. Either they had taken her, or she had escaped. And if she had escaped, she was still running. Geralt turned to the woman. Thank you, She nodded, but said nothing more. What was there to say? He stepped out of the hut, the cold biting against his skin. The village was still shrouded in silence, but the sky above had begun to lighten. The first hints of dawn stretching across the horizon. Time was slipping away. He fastened the pendant around his neck, tucking it beneath his armor. Then, with one last glance toward the abandoned hut, he strode back toward the waiting boat. By the time he reached the shore, the captain was already preparing to leave. "You're back," the Skelliger said, watching him closely. That was fast. Geralt climbed aboard, settling into his seat. The wild hunt was here. The man stiffened. Even the most hardened warriors feared the spectral riders. And the girl. Geralt stared out at the sea, his voice steady. She's still out there. The wind howled around them as the boat pushed off from shore, the waves crashing against its sides. The journey back to Caer Trolled would be long, but Geralt's mind was already racing ahead. He needed to return to Yennefer. He needed answers. As the island of Hindarsfjall faded into the distance, one thought remained. He was close now, closer than ever before, and the hunt knew it. The journey back to Caer Trolled was harsh, the sea roaring with the fury of an oncoming storm. The longboat rocked against the waves, the Skelligers muttering prayers to their gods, their hands tight on the oars. Geralt sat in silence, his mind far from the churning waters, focused only on what lay ahead. Ciri had been here. She had been running, hiding, leaving clues in the hopes that he would find her before the hunt did. But he was always one step behind. The wild hunt's presence lingered in Lofoten, its icy touch still fresh. He could feel it, a disturbance in the balance of the world, an unnatural cold that did not fade with time. They had come, but had they found her? Or had she slipped through their grasp once more? His fingers brushed against the swallow-shaped pendant hanging from his neck. Zyril, her symbol. A name whispered across the continent, tied to a girl who carried the blood of ancient power, a child of prophecy who could reshape the world with every choice she made. He had to find her. The longboat finally reached the shores of Caer Trolled just as dusk settled over the stronghold. The scent of salt and pine clung to the air, mingling with the distant scent of burning wood. Warriors moved along the docks, sharpening their weapons, speaking in low voices. Even here, where the strong ruled and the weak did not survive, there was an unease in the air. Geralt did not linger. He climbed the stone steps leading toward the Jarl's Hall, his boots damp from the sea spray. Cratch and Crate was waiting for him inside, seated at the great wooden table, a half-empty tankard in hand. He looked up as Geralt entered, his expression grave. "You found something," Cratch said. It was not a question. Geralt nodded, tossing his damp cloak over the back of a chair. She was in Lofoten, but the wild hunt was there too. Cratch's jaw tightened. Did they take her? Geralt hesitated. "I don't know." She left something behind, a pendant, a message. She was waiting for someone, but the hunt came first. There was a portal. Cratch cursed under his breath. Then she's gone. But where? Geralt exhaled. That's what I need to find out. The Jarl studied him for a long moment, then reached for a jug of mead, pouring 2 cups. Drink, he said. You'll need your strength. Geralt took the cup, though he barely tasted the alcohol as it burned down his throat. His thoughts were already moving, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Avalanche. The name still echoed in his mind. If Ciri had spoken it before vanishing, it meant she had turned to him for help. Avalanche was no ordinary elf. He was a sage of the Een-El, a race of elves from another world, beings of immense knowledge and power. He had been studying the elder blood for centuries, watching, waiting. If Ciri had sought him out, it meant she had few choices left. I need to get to Yennefer, Geralt said, setting the cup down. She might know where Avalanche is, or at least where to start looking. Cratch nodded. Then take a boat. There's one waiting for you in the harbor. Geralt stood, fastening his swords. If the wild hunt comes here, if they think Ciri is still on Skellige, they'll find no welcome, Cratch interrupted. A grim smile crossed his face. We are not so easily broken, Witcher. Geralt gave a small nod of gratitude before turning toward the exit. Then I'll be on my way. The trip back to the mainland was a blur of restless sleep and relentless thoughts. The hunt was too close, moving with a precision that suggested they knew more than he did. He had to be faster, smarter, before they reached her first. By the time the boat docked in Novigrad, dawn was breaking, the city stretching before him in a sea of spires and smoke. Novigrad, the free city, a place where wealth and corruption walked hand in hand, where mages were burned at the stake, while criminals ruled from the shadows. And somewhere within its labyrinth of streets, Yennefer waited. Geralt moved quickly through the bustling markets, ignoring the wary glances and whispered insults. Novigrad had never been a city kind to witchers, but he had no time to waste on old prejudices. He made his way toward a secluded inn near the harbor, a place where sorceresses could move unseen, where whispers carried further than coin. Yennefer was waiting in the private room above, standing near the window, gazing out at the morning haze. She did not turn as he entered, but she spoke, her voice calm yet laced with something unreadable. You found her. Not yet, he admitted, but I found her trail. She was in Skellige. The hunt was right behind her. Now she turned, her violet eyes sharp. And Avalanche, he said. She spoke his name before she disappeared. Yennefer frowned, crossing her arms. Then she's playing a dangerous game. Avalanche is not one to involve himself lightly. Geralt met her gaze. Can you find him? Yennefer exhaled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Perhaps, if he wants to be found. Then we start now, Geralt said. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. There's a place she said. A ruin hidden in the forests of Velen. It was once a sanctuary for elven sages. If Avalanche left any trace, it might be there. Then we ride. Yennefer smirked slightly. No time for rest then. Geralt's expression remained serious. Not when the wild hunt is already moving. She sighed. Very well, give me an hour. I'll make the preparations. He nodded, stepping back toward the door. But before he could leave, Yennefer spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Geralt. He paused. Be careful, she said. He met her gaze, the weight of all they had been through reflected in her violet eyes. I always am, he murmured. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Merchants calling, beggars pleading, guards patrolling with weary indifference. But Geralt had no eyes for any of it. The path ahead was clear. He had a name. He had a destination. And soon he would have answers. The forests of Velen stretched before them like an endless, tangled maze. The gnarled trees whispering in the wind, their twisted branches reaching for unseen prey. The land here was different, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with time. It carried the weight of forgotten things, of curses left to fester, of magic that had seeped into the earth itself. Geralt rode in silence, Roach's hooves kicking up damp leaves as they moved along the narrow trail. Beside him, Yennefer sat tall in her saddle, her dark cloak wrapped tightly around her. The scent of lilac and gooseberries faint beneath the ever-present stench of decay that clung to Velen. They had left Novigrad at dawn, riding hard through the battered countryside, past burned-out farmsteads and abandoned villages. War had scarred this land, just as it had scarred so many others. But war was not the only thing lurking here. The ruin isn't far now, Yennefer murmured, her violet eyes scanning the mist-draped trees. If Avalanche left anything behind, we'll find it there. Geralt nodded, but said nothing. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the subtle shift in the air that warned of things unnatural. Velen was home to monsters, but it was also home to worse things, things born of desperation, of loss, of blood spilled carelessly on cursed ground. As they rode deeper, the path narrowed, the undergrowth thickening. The wind carried distant howls, the sound of something moving between the trees, watching. Geralt's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword. Yennefer smirked, paranoid. Experienced, he corrected. She chuckled softly, but said no more. Soon, the ruins came into view, what remained of an ancient elven sanctuary. Its once grand arches now crumbling beneath the weight of centuries. Ivy strangled the stone, cracks running deep like veins, whispering of the slow decay of time. Yet, despite its state, magic still clung to this place, humming beneath the surface like a dying heartbeat. Geralt dismounted, his boots crunching against loose gravel as he approached the entrance. Yennefer followed, her fingers already crackling with unseen energy, ready for whatever lay ahead. The inside of the ruins was cold, unnaturally so. The air smelled of damp stone and old magic, the kind that left a taste of metal on the tongue. Faintly glowing runes lined the walls, their inscriptions worn but still pulsing with ancient power. Yennefer stepped closer, her fingers tracing the faded markings. Elven, older than anything we've seen before. Geralt scanned the room, his eyes sharp. "Can you read it?" She hesitated. "Some of it. It speaks of a passage, a place between worlds, a sanctuary for those who walk both realms." Geralt exhaled. "Avalanche." Yennefer nodded. "It makes sense. If Ciri was looking for him, this is where she would have come." Geralt's gaze moved across the room, searching for anything out of place. Then he saw it, half buried beneath a layer of dust, tucked into the corner of the chamber. A piece of cloth, torn and weathered, its once rich embroidery dulled by time. But he knew that pattern. He had seen it before. Ciri's cloak. He picked it up slowly, his gloved fingers brushing over the fabric. She had been here. Recently, the scent of her lingered, faint but unmistakable. Yennefer stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "It's hers, isn't it?" Geralt nodded. She was here. A sudden gust of wind tore through the chamber, sending dust swirling into the air. The runes along the walls pulsed violently, as if reacting to something unseen. Then, from the far end of the ruins, a sound echoed, a deep, guttural growl that sent ice crawling down the spine. Geralt turned sharply, his sword already in hand. The shadows shifted, and then it stepped forward. A hound, but not just any hound. This one bore the mark of the wild hunt, its skeletal form wreathed in frost, its eyes burning with an unnatural blue fire. It snarled, mist curling from its maw, claws scraping against the stone as it prowled toward them. Yennefer cursed, her hands lighting with crackling energy. They left a guardian. Geralt tightened his grip on his blade. "Looks that way." The hound lunged. Geralt moved with practiced precision, dodging the first swipe as his silver sword flashed through the air. The beast's claws struck stone, sending shards flying, its movements unnaturally fast. Yennefer unleashed a bolt of violet lightning, the energy slamming into the creature's side, sending it skidding backward with a howl of rage. But it did not fall. Instead, it turned its burning gaze toward Yennefer, ice forming at its feet as it prepared to strike. Geralt acted without thinking, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He leapt forward, his sword slicing through the frozen air, meeting the beast's thick hide with a deafening clang. Sparks flew as silver met frost, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of steel and snarling fury. The hound reared back, wounded but not beaten. Geralt pressed the advantage. He feinted left, then drove his blade deep into its side. The beast let out a bone-chilling screech, its body convulsing as the magic that held it together unraveled. With a final shudder, it collapsed, its its form dissolving into mist, leaving only the echoes of its cry behind. Silence returned. Geralt exhaled, wiping his blade clean as he turned to Yennefer. "You all right?" She nodded, brushing dust from her sleeves. "I've had worse." He glanced toward the far side of the chamber, where the hound had emerged. There, partially hidden beneath rubble, lay another marking. Not just runes, but something more, something recent. A symbol, a swallow, etched into the stone. Geralt's heart clenched. Ciri had been here. She had left this mark, a sign meant for him. Yennefer stepped beside him, her voice quiet. "She's leading us somewhere." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Then we follow." The hunt was closer than ever. The pieces were coming together, but time was running out. They had to find Ciri before it was too late. The ruin's silence was oppressive, thick with the weight of old magic and the lingering chill of the wild hunt's presence. Geralt traced his fingers over the etched swallow symbol, his mind working through the implications. Ciri had been here long enough to leave a sign, a message. But she was moving, always moving, slipping through the cracks of the world like mist before dawn. Yennefer stood beside him, her violet eyes narrowing as she studied the marking. "She's leading us somewhere," she murmured. Geralt exhaled, straightening. "Or warning us." The wild hunt was closing in. They had left their hounds behind as sentinels, waiting for anyone who might follow her trail. That meant they knew she had passed through. That meant they were still hunting her. Yennefer brushed a hand over the stone, her expression unreadable. "This place is old, tied to the elder blood in ways even I don't fully understand. If Avalanche guided her here, it wasn't by accident. There's something important about this ruin, something connected to her." Geralt turned, scanning the room once more. The magic here was faint, worn with age, but not dead. The elves had once walked these halls, their secrets buried beneath centuries of dust and decay. If Avalanche had used this place as a sanctuary, there had to be more than just broken walls and faded glyphs. His instincts led him to the far end of the chamber, where the remains of an ancient archway stood, half collapsed. The air was different here, charged with a quiet hum. He knelt, pressing his palm to the ground. The magic here wasn't gone, it was waiting. Yennefer noticed his pause. "What is it?" "A portal," Geralt said. "Or what's left of one." Yennefer's brow furrowed. She extended a hand, her fingertips glowing faintly as she traced the air just above the stone. A spark of violet energy flickered to life, briefly illuminating the ruin in a cold glow. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "It's inactive," she murmured, "but not broken. It needs power." Geralt frowned. "Can you open it?" She hesitated. "I can try, but without knowing where it leads." "It's a risk we have to take," Geralt said firmly. "If Ciri went through here, then this might be the only way to catch up." Yennefer exhaled, nodding. "Stand back." Geralt moved aside as she raised her hands, drawing upon the latent energy within the ruin. Magic crackled around her, the air growing thick with the scent of ozone and power. The runes along the archway flickered weakly, as if awakening from a long slumber. Then, with a final surge of effort, the portal flared to life, a swirling vortex of shimmering light, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Yennefer stepped back, breathing hard. It won't hold for long. Geralt didn't hesitate. He stepped toward the portal, glancing at her once before plunging through. The sensation was instant, disorienting, weightless, like being pulled through an endless void. Light and shadow twisted around him, the world shifting in impossible ways. Then, just as suddenly, he was standing on solid ground once more. He stumbled forward, his senses reeling, the air around him sharp and thin. The world had changed. Gone were the ruined elven halls, the broken stones of Velen. Instead, he found himself in a place that was neither night nor day, bathed in an eerie twilight. The sky above was an endless swirl of deep blues and purples, stars burning brighter than they should. The landscape stretched before him in rolling hills of silver grass, dotted with jagged obsidian monoliths that pulsed faintly with unseen energy. Not the continent, another world. El. Geralt exhaled slowly. Avalanche's world. The distant sound of hooves echoed across the land, and he turned sharply, his hand already on his sword. Through the shifting mist, figures emerged, tall, graceful, clad in silver and black armor. Elves, but not the kind that roamed the forests of the continent. These were the El, the rulers of a world beyond human reach, and at their head stood Avalanche. The elven sage regarded him with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and calculation, his piercing eyes glinting with an intelligence that saw far beyond the present moment. He was clad in flowing robes, his white hair barely shifting in the still air. "You are persistent, Witcher," Avalanche said smoothly, his voice carrying through the twilight. "But then, I suppose that is why she chose you." Geralt stepped forward, keeping his grip firm on his blade. "Where is she?" Avalanche studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Safe, for now." Geralt's patience was thin. "That's not an answer." The elf tilted his head slightly. "It is the only answer I can give." Geralt clenched his jaw. She was running. The wild hunt was close. "If you know something." "I know many things," Avalanche interrupted. "But knowing and revealing are two different matters. Ciri is beyond your reach at the moment. Not lost, but out of step with this world." Geralt took a slow breath, reining in his frustration. "Then bring me to her." Avalanche smiled faintly. "It is not that simple. She has a path to walk, one that cannot be rushed. And you have your own role to play." Geralt's grip on his sword tightened. "I'm done playing games, Avalanche. I will find her, with or without your help." The elven sage regarded him with something that might have been amusement or pity. You mistake me, Witcher. I do not seek to stop you. I seek to prepare you." He gestured toward the vast expanse of the El realm, where distant lights shimmered like dying stars. "The wild hunt moves faster than you know. They will not stop until they have her. And when that moment comes, you must be ready." Geralt narrowed his eyes. "Then tell me where she's going." Avalanche exhaled slowly. "The tower." The words sent a chill through Geralt's spine. The Tower of the Swallow, an ancient structure tied to the Elder Blood, a place that existed between worlds. If Ciri was headed there, it meant one thing. She was trying to outrun destiny itself. Geralt stepped forward. "Take me there." Avalanche watched him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Very well." The path was set. The chase was nearing its end, and the wild hunt was already waiting. The wind howled across the endless twilight, carrying whispers of things unseen. Geralt followed Avalanche through the shifting mist of the El realm, his boots crunching against the strange, silver grass beneath him. The sky above was an endless abyss of swirling stars, impossibly vast, untouched by the cycle of day and night. It was a world outside time, where fate unraveled in ways beyond mortal understanding. Ahead, the landscape sloped into a valley where a great tower rose, black stone streaked with veins of glowing blue, twisting into the sky like a dagger aimed at the heart of the heavens. The Tower of the Swallow, a place of immense power, a beacon between worlds, a doorway to things far beyond the grasp of men. Ciri was there. Geralt's grip tightened on his sword hilt, his instincts sharpening. The wild hunt had pursued her this far. They would not let her escape so easily. Avalanche stopped at the crest of the hill, his piercing eyes fixed upon the tower. "She is near," he murmured, "but so are they." Geralt followed his gaze. The air around the tower shimmered unnaturally, as if reality itself strained to contain the forces gathering there. And then, through the mist, they emerged. The wild hunt, tall, armored figures wreathed in frost and shadow, their skeletal steeds pawing at the ground, mist curling from their nostrils. They moved with an unnatural grace, their weapons gleaming with a cold light. And at their head, clad in dark metal that seemed to drink the very light from the sky, rode Eredin, the king of the wild hunt, his crown jagged as the ice he commanded, his eyes burning with the fire of a relentless pursuit. He had come for her. Geralt drew his sword. Avalanche exhaled. Foolishness. Geralt barely heard him. He was already moving. He sprinted down the hill, the air crackling around him as Yennefer's portal flared open behind him. He barely had time to register it before she emerged, her violet eyes glowing with raw power, her hands wreathed in energy. She had followed him. She had known. The battlefield erupted. Eredin raised a gauntleted hand, and the air split with a deafening crack as a wave of frost surged toward them. Geralt rolled beneath it, his blade flashing as he cut down the first rider to reach him. The Wild Hunt's warriors were faster than men, their strikes deadly, but Geralt had fought them before. He knew their movements, their weaknesses. He ducked beneath a swinging axe, his silver sword biting deep into spectral armor. The rider howled, dissolving into mist. Yennefer's magic lashed out, arcs of violet lightning cutting through the storm, shattering ice and sending warriors sprawling. But they kept coming. The hunt did not falter, did not tire. Then, above the chaos, a voice rang out. Geralt. He turned sharply. At the base of the tower, her form barely visible through the swirling mist, stood Ciri. Her ashen hair whipped in the wind, her green eyes wide with urgency. Power crackled around her, uncontrolled, wild, the energy of the elder blood burning in her veins. She was trying to open a portal, trying to escape, but Eredin was already moving toward her. Geralt surged forward, cutting through the warriors that blocked his path. He could see her, so close, yet impossibly far. The world seemed to slow, every heartbeat stretching into eternity. Ciri raised her hands, the air bending and warping as magic flared to life around her. A portal shimmered, unstable, forming against the tower's obsidian walls. Eredin was nearly upon her. Geralt reached for her, his voice raw. Ciri. She turned, their eyes meeting across the battlefield, across the chaos. And then she stepped back. Geralt's breath caught. She was leaving. For a split second, everything else faded, the clash of swords, the roar of the hunt, the crackling storm of magic. It was just them, just her. I have to go, she said. Geralt's chest tightened. Not alone. Her expression softened, a sad smile touching her lips. It has to be. She reached for the portal, her fingers brushing against its shimmering edge. The energy surged around her, pulling her in. Geralt lunged, but the world shattered. The portal collapsed in an explosion of light, the force throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. When he looked up, she was gone. The wild hunt reeled, their momentum broken. The moment Ciri vanished, the battlefield seemed to shift, as if reality itself had lost its anchor. Eredin snarled, his eyes locking onto Geralt with fury. Then, without a word, he raised his hand. The hunt retreated. One by one, they disappeared into the mist, their forms dissolving like frost beneath the rising sun. Silence fell. Geralt forced himself to his feet, his vision swimming. Yennefer appeared at his side, her face pale, her magic still crackling at her fingertips. She's gone, she whispered. Geralt didn't answer. He only stared at the empty space where Ciri had stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. Avalanche approached slowly, his expression unreadable. She is beyond their reach now. Geralt turned to him, his voice sharp. Where is she? Avalanche studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. Where she must be. The words offered no comfort, no certainty, only more questions. But one thing was clear, Ciri was gone, lost between worlds, beyond his grasp. And the hunt was still out there, waiting for their next move. The fight was not over. Geralt closed his eyes for a brief moment, then turned toward the distant horizon. The road continued, and he would follow.